Before we get into the rankings, a quick shout out from our sponsors over at Cheipeku. Tons of D&D classes bank on the map they're put on to get full use out of their features, and Cheipeku's projects fill the scene with tons of ways for parties to interact with the game. From the dozens of crates stationed on high castle walls to heist notes scrawled across tavern tables, hearing parties jump for joy and exploring every map you place down has never been easier. Plug and play your own stories onto each environment and bring each map to life in your own unique way. And as one of the oldest map creators on Patreon, there's a near infinite archive of worlds to explore through Cheipeku's works. Then, to top it all off, their animated maps turn an already beautiful scene into an unforgettable moment. A subscription to the whole catalog starts at $1, making them the best creators to take your campaigns to the next level. Check them out in the description below. But with that said, let's get right into the video. I'm the only person in the D&D community that I think can be trusted to make a tier list video like this. Why? Well, number one, I've done this twice before, with each video a year older than the last. The first time I went with my own opinions on each class, and the second I did a live stream to let you all rank them for me. On both tier lists, you all left a slew of comments with your own opinions on each class, and I read as many as I could to understand the community better. Two, I've been polling you all for years now to gauge the most common ways people play the game, and have a good idea on what goes on in the average modern D&D player's campaign. And three, I've listened to every extreme of the community, from the optimizers that want to be literal gods on the field of combat, the role players that want to talk to cute NPCs all day, and everyone in between. So I can already tell you that making just one tier list and claiming it caters to an entire community completely undermines everything that makes D&D so great nowadays. So we're making three instead. The roleplay tier list is going to show you where your class ranks in games dominated by heavy RP, initiative is rarely rolled, and interacting with the environment in creative ways is actually important. Flavor is also huge in the roleplay tier, and classes that make it easy for players to go wild with their lore and for the DM to easily tie the world into those characters get bonus points. The combat tier list focuses on how good your class tends to feel when in the heat of things, how flexible their kits are to deal with a slew of trouble, and how many resources they get to play with in a typical session. More resources just means more to do in combat on average, and classes with a more restricted pool of cool stuff they can do in a fight won't fare well on the list. Then the final tier list just takes the averages, just to show where your class stands if you enjoy a healthy blend of both. For the majority of you, this is the one that actually matters. Before we continue, there's a lot of assumptions being made in the hopes of this tier list being accurate to not all of you, but most. If you feel I put a class in a weird tier, come back to these assumptions and compare them to your own games. You have 1 to 2 dangerous combats between every long rest. You take 1 short rest per session, and 2 if you're lucky. Most of you don't make it further than level 13, and you're not optimizing to maximize your character's combat potential. Then finally, because subclasses can make a class go from completely useless to bonkers broken, we're mostly only talking about the base features of every class. There's been a massive rise in homebrew subclasses in the community too, and a tier list ranking Ranger in S tier just because Gloomstalker is OP doesn't help the broader community at all. These tier lists are designed with the idea that you just wandered into a class, prefer a certain playstyle, and have no idea what to expect. As you play and gain experience, the drawbacks of some classes might not even apply to you anymore, and I'd encourage you to compare your own experiences to the assumptions of this tier list to figure out where each class stands on your own merit. But with formalities out of the way, let's get started. Artificer. In terms of roleplay, upper A tier. Artificers have a ton of small flavor mechanics with a lot of details on how they work. The goal of Artificer was to make a class that felt like they had an unlimited number of items they could craft, both at a moment's notice and over long rests. For the most part, it worked, and Artificer has tons of flavor between all the crafting-based skills it has. The problem is that Artificer may be one of the most complicated classes in D&D. Newcomers might get too overwhelmed and never fully use all that creativity, or pick flavor options that'll rarely get the chance to be shown off in-game. Choosing between a list of trinkets you can make, to infusions you can craft, to infusions you actually craft, to spells you know, to tools you have on hand, makes Artificers incredible options for people who can handle all the features. In terms of combat, upper B tier. Infusions are alright as they can give you a nice damage or defense buff that sticks around for a long time, and Flash of Genius can remind characters how to survive fireballs. Getting this at the cost of being a half-caster doesn't make up for it on average though, and you'll continue to notice through every tier list that classes with more spell slots always rank higher. Does keep them nicely in the middle of the pack though. Barbarian. In terms of roleplay, lowest C tier. Rage is like the only Barbarian feature that can get regular roleplay use outside of combat, and it's barely even usable at that. Getting advantage on strength checks can be fun for strength-based roleplay, like tossing boulders or holding doors shut, but you have to attack or take damage every turn to keep the effects going. Just a super poor oversight by the devs for getting that marshals might want to roleplay outside of combat too. Danger Sense lets you take less damage from traps and fireballs, but features that let you just avoid danger reactionarily are usually low bars for roleplay standards. Being the class that encourages players to play into their strength is the main draw, and it sucks to say you can do it better with literally any other class above D tier. In terms of combat, low C tier. Barbarians have a very limited number of times they can rage, limiting the fun and power that comes from going berserk. Brutal Critical relies entirely on random number generation out of your control, which is odd for a character-defining core mechanic, and any attempts at grappling enemies or jumping long distances with all that strength of yours goes to waste when you remember full casters can conjure tentacle monsters and cast the jump spell. All your power is self-serving, and compared to other classes, you lack anything fun to pull out that the DM didn't hand you personally. Bard. In terms of roleplay, upper S tier. The inherent flavor that just oozes out of the word bard is enough to fill an entire session with the seduction of NPCs, musical solos in taverns, and spells to influence all the shenanigans you get yourself into. Bard players tend to dress up to D&D games, play live music out of game, or enjoy designing playlists with tunes they'd imagine their character could play. Jack of all trades and expertise also help bards be the face of parties, giving you even more chances to roleplay with all the NPCs that come your way. Vicious Mockery is a spell that also gets hilariously overused, but for good reason, because tons of bard players love to literally mock their enemies while using it, and DMs love roleplaying how angry or depressed it makes their monsters. The more you play into your bardish traits, the more fun stuff your DMs tend to prepare in their towns and cities. They're also a full caster with an endless bounty of fun RP spells to choose from. In terms of combat, B tier. Bardic inspirations are great to throw out everywhere, but everyone constantly forgets to use them, so that kinda sucks. Magical Secrets is great for getting your hands on the best spells in the game, but you need to know which ones those are if you want to make the most out of this feature. Fireball. And a lot of your other features kinda set your team up out of combat, but don't do anything while you're in it. Both being a full caster and having healing spells of any variety always drags you up the list though. Once again, another solid base class that holds up in casual D&D games. Cleric, in terms of roleplay, lowest S tier. The identity of the Cleric is understood by basically the entire gaming community, so everyone knows exactly what you're getting yourself into playing this class. Clerics are more covert than the other classes in S tier with how they roleplay, because it's not any grand actions being taken right off the bat. You say a little prayer over here, you light a few incense over there, just small things that always remind your party of the god you worship and what both you and them stand for. As you do this more, other characters start asking more questions, and the DM gets more comfortable playing into the flavor. Eventually, you might get to even start talking to your own god or their servants directly, which is always fun. And again, being a full caster opens your feature list to have any type of spell you think would be fun to have in any given adventuring day. In terms of combat, lowest S tier. It's super easy to accidentally wander into everything that makes clerics overpowered. Tons of strong spells are on their list that you can never go wrong picking up. You get your subclass unlocked at level 1 and have 3 different ways of channeling divinity that all come back every short rest. Clerics are a prime example of a class done right, and every other class below it needs to take notes. Druid. In terms of roleplay, low S tier. Druids are another class that suffers from roleplay complexity because knowing all the animals you can turn into and all the other features is kinda tough for some players to manage. Once you get into the groove though, you'll find that Wild Shape might be one of the most enjoyable abilities out of the entire game. From turning into a spider for climbing into buildings and eavesdropping on enemies, to giant frogs able to leap into the air and stay underwater forever, no other class gets this level of versatility this early into the game. Again, you're also a full caster, and although DMs don't pull on your flavor or plot threads as often, it's fine because the level of control you have over your own fun in the moment more than makes up for it. In terms of combat, top of S tier. Turning into giant beefy animals that can perfectly counter every fight is obviously strong. The fact each animal form gives you an entire extra health bar is kinda wild. Get it? And your spell list is on par with the clerics in terms of wandering into overpowered options. If you can wrap your head around using these features, Druid is easily one of the most versatile and feature-filled classes in the game. Fighter. In terms of roleplay, C tier. The Fighter has next to nothing special going on with it. The only reason it'll be above some of the other martials on this list is because people tend to take the completely basic vanilla class and gush it full of their own flavor. Newbies are just so unintimidated by it that they pick up on it quickly and can get right into doing what they love, which is fleshing out other aspects of their characters and actually role-playing. That's a huge reason why so many dungeon masters encourage people to play the Fighter. It's just a great class to start with, and a very easy one to multi-class out of to build your abilities off of what's going on in the story. For more experienced players, they can do that with any class, so none of this matters to them. In terms of combat, C tier. Action Surge always gets everyone watching to see what you use it on during a fight. Sad to say, it's best used with casting multiple spells in a single turn, and for that, you need to multi-class out of Fighter. Second Wind is fun to heal up and mock your enemies with your indomitable Fighter Spirit, but the Healing Word spell all the support casters get is still so much more versatile. These features come back on a short rest, keeping you going, but that's about all you tend to get. Weapons in 5e aren't interesting enough for extra attacks to matter any other way than as a damage check, and not saying doing damage isn't important, but once again, being able to have fun in other ways without feeling less efficient also is. Then Indomitable is basically just advantage on a few saving throws, which doesn't guarantee anything, and also only recharges on a long rest. The blank slate of a class that makes it easy to stick any personality and fighting style onto it is the draw. And even though Fighter holds a special place in my heart, I can't deny how simple the gameplay loop for them tends to get. Monk. In terms of roleplay, lowest C tier. Monk is just really misunderstood, and nobody has plans to do anything about that anytime soon. DMs rarely do anything with your monastery, players barely acknowledge their monastery, you don't get a single ability dedicated to roleplay until level 4, and although it's a cool one, being able to ignore fall damage, it's just not enough to put it any higher on the list. A bunch of other features, just like Paladin, which we'll get into next, cancel out roleplay, like ending charms, friend effects, or diseases instantly. And right where most players stop playing at level 13, you get the first feature that I'd say is just neat to have, aka the ability to speak every language. The monk's entire leveling path is filled with attacking features and leaves role players on red for far too long. In terms of combat, top of C tier. You'd think all those attacking features would mean monks are super catered for combat, right? Well, in 5e, basically every martial has half the resources they probably should. And even if you double the amount of key points monks have, I'd still say they'd just be alright. The fact that key points come back on a short rest is the saving grace, and with your bread and butter combos relying on them with stunning strikes and focused aim, safely makes the monk one of the most comfortable full martials to play. That's not saying a lot, by the way. Paladin. In terms of roleplay, A tier. Paladins are heavily encouraged to be combat characters. Most of their features can only come in clutch in the heat of combat, and a few of their features actually remove roleplaying from the game. Like, wow, I just immediately cleansed your disease with the wave of my hand. I wonder what type of disease it was, or how it could have played into the longer narrative. Oh, by the way, I'm also immune to them myself, so don't even think about it. Paladins are blessed, though, by the fact that they're a charisma caster, giving roleplayers a chance to be the party's face on occasion. And although I'm not going too far into oaths because they're technically subclass features, the flavor that comes from following tenets can be a lot of fun and is the main selling point for the roleplay. Having a few non-combat spells on their spell list to choose from is always nice. And with that, the bad swirls in with the good to create a class that's perfectly blended for A tier. In terms of combat, lower A tier. Smites are super fun to mix and match, are decently strong, and make flailing boring weapons a lot more impactful. It's easy to multiclass into Warlock so you can swing your weapon with charisma instead of spreading points and strength, and all your auras can be super strong if your group actually stands inside of them. That's harder to predict though, because not all classes and characters will want to do that. The burst healing you have with Lay on Hands is really cool, but Healing Word is still better at most levels and you don't get to have it. Overall, a great class to play if you understand its ups and downs. Ranger. In terms of roleplay, lower A tier. Ranger is a bit of an odd one because it's a split between the old Ranger and the revised one. Revised is all about making the more specific features of the Ranger usable in more situations, and since this just inherently gives you more chances to play the game, we'll only be looking at the revised abilities. Canny is basically a baby form of the rogue's expertise, and most Rangers shove it into perception or stealth. Being able to cast a bunch of roleplay spells for free every day at higher levels is basically bribing it to happen, and playing into being the local wildlife expert always feels really comfy when you choose a class flavored around it. But everything else the class has going for it is great. Just hope your DM lets you travel through some wild environments every once in a while, and you're good to go. In terms of combat, lowest A tier. Favorite foe is great on boss enemies that stick around for a while because you can proc the extra damage over and over again. And going invisible with bonus actions at level 10 is really fun. Base kit, it's just a slightly weaker paladin since more features rely on specific events, like Land Stride giving you advantage to escape magical plants. How much more specific can you get? But getting a slew of roleplay spells you can cast for free frees up your spell list for more combat-focused ones. So Rangers in combat sit nicely right behind Paladin, less catered to it, but still basically holding the same weight. Rogue. In terms of roleplay, B tier. Everyone knows what a rogue is, how a rogue plays, and what their role in a party is. You get to hoard all the loner backstories, dead parents, and trauma-filled lore bits to sprinkle into the game. Most of the time, when parties hear that someone's making a rogue, they try not to step on your toes. It means you always get the undisputed privilege of putting all your ability score points into dexterity, sneaking around everywhere, and pilfering everyone's pockets. Rogues don't get to do this very often, though, because the nature of D&D kind of forces the whole party to move as a big group together. But whenever you get a chance to use your slew of expertise to sail through a roleplay encounter, you'll feel like an absolute legend. Magical classes can once again mimic the entire feel of a rogue though, but I'm glad as a martial they could at least escape the pit of C tier for this one. In terms of combat though, lowest C tier. Rogues are only on par with every other martial when they succeed their stealth rolls, always have advantage, and always hit their targets. On average, a level 2 rogue does 12 damage with a longbow on their turn if they can proc sneak attack. And for some reason I feel like I have to explain this. Druids can transform into golden stags, ram someone for 13 damage, and then knock their target prone. It's stronger with half the effort, and let's not forget, that's one transformation out of dozens they can turn into, provides a health shield, and offers utility in the form of the prone condition. Rogues become stale in combat very fast, and their base kit has no way to support their own party outside of their average damage output. Sorcerer. In terms of roleplay, top of A tier. So this class is all about having a magical connection to something, just like Cleric or Warlock, but the way you got that connection is usually a lot more out of your character's control. What makes Sorcerer flavorful is all the ways you constantly describe how your character looks, sounds, smells, the whole shebang. One Sorcerer could be ticking like a clock, the other has a heart that doesn't beat. The fun is entirely made up by you. Feature-wise, metamagic is great because it can give your spells a lot of small flavor effects that can enhance their uses out of combat, like making roleplay spells last longer or casting magic without having to speak. By definition, they're not meta per se, but if you need a more roleplay focused sorcerer, it's always there. In terms of combat, upper A tier. Sorcerers are basically just less complicated wizards. In a perfect min-maxing world, wizard sweeps every time because having access to learn every spell in the game and cast all your ritual spells is amazing. But in casual games, sorcerer is just so much less restricted and easier to understand and play. Sorcery points are also handy because all of your class resources can be converted into any other. If you like casting spells more than augmenting them with metamagic, just create more spell slots. Super easy. Sorcerers get to do whatever they want whenever they want with their features, and it makes it so easy to make plans and have the points on hand to make them happen. Warlock. In terms of roleplay, top of S tier. D&D players have a strange fascination with warlocks as a concept. Everyone loves the trope of being offered magic by a strange unknown entity of ultimate power. Players love playing into it, and DMs love going off the rails of their own stories to cater to it. Warlocks in every campaign I've been in get preferential treatment to their lore, and overpowered devils showing up halfway into the game to talk to warlocks like good friends, or toss the party into the pits of Avernus shakes things up constantly. In terms of actual features, warlocks have plenty of invocations, with a lot having unlimited uses, letting you flavor yourself for any type of role-playing environment you like the most. Devil's Sight can make it so you're the only person in the party who can see color without light. Aspect of the Moon makes it so you never have to sleep again, giving you an extra 8 hours of stuff you can do every day. And Eldritch Sight lets you detect magic the moment it gets close to you. The Warlock spell list is flavorful, and wrapping your head around spellcasting isn't too difficult. And although packed boons are a bit limiting in variety and customization, the fact that they give you a whole nother set of essentially infinite magical powers can't be understated. It's a super flavorful class you can't go wrong with in any roleplay hungry D&D campaign. In terms of combat, lowest B tier. Warlocks aren't respected nearly enough by the majority of tables. Since they need short rests to regain spells, that means you need to pause the adventuring and ask the group to settle down for an hour while you recharge. It can feel like you're toying with the pacing of the game, especially when the entire group is raring to go. The core of your magic relies on taking short rests constantly, and most parties only do 1 or 2 at the most. Everything else you get from your class is great and all, but a pure lack of spell slots sucks and puts you a bit behind the other full spellcasters on average. It's sad because if your party completely starves you of rest, you'll just wind up shooting your little pew pew Eldritch Blast spell over and over again for the entire session. And finally, Wizard. In terms of roleplay, lowest A tier, while in terms of combat, upper A tier. The way wizards prepare spells is annoying to understand starting off, but after that, it's smooth sailing. A main draw of Wizard is their ability to learn an infinite amount of spells so long as they have gold on hand and paper in their spellbook, and being able to ritual cast every ritual you have in there is obviously good. You're playing one of the only base kit classes that's expected to get stronger through in-game events though. And with that said, it means DMs can accidentally make you stronger or significantly weaker in both combat and roleplay. Most tables don't give out spell scrolls very often, so you need to constantly remind your DM that you want to find some during the game, or hunt down magic shops and buy some yourself. Having gold in any capacity also isn't guaranteed in every campaign. Wizard is just a huge gamble to play at tables where the DM doesn't make it very obvious what to expect from them. And even if you're only playing in official adventures, the chances you'll get to study new magic is still very limited. One final note on flavor, Wizards don't promote a lot of flavor from their class off the bat. The fact that they're just so versatile with magic means they never need to fill a niche. That's nice for doing whatever you want whenever you want, but also means your identity on the team is usually just the magic person more often than not. But hey, even with everything working against Wizards, the pure way their features work essentially forces them to be a good class. Play a Wizard when you know what to expect, and you'll have a great time every time. And with that said, let's combine everything together into the ultimate tier list, mixing roleplay with combat to create a chart that actually caters to the majority of you. Bam! Ta-da! Okay, now 2 notes. Paladin and Warlock scored the same based on the average of the 2 tiers they were in, so even though Warlock is behind it, they're in the same spot. Then, as for Artificer being in B tier, just know it was only a few points shy of getting into A, and I feel bad having it sit there by itself. Hopefully some of you can read between the data to find a class you'll enjoy for your next character. Quite the contrary, I've been Blaine Simple, and I'll see you all in the next video.